So hi, my name's April Clarke. I'm a proud Gunditjmara Kirrawah woman from the Western Districts of Victoria, mainly from, my family come from Warrnambool and the Framlingham Mission. I'm also a mother of 3 sons and a grandmother to 3 children, a 4-year-old granddaughter, a 3-year-old grandson and a 5-year-old grandson. And I would also, before we start this interview, like to acknowledge the lands on which I'm sitting and being interviewed, the gorgeous sacred lands, and acknowledge the Anangu people of Uluru and pay my respects to their past and present elders and all mobs currently here during NAIDOC week and across the nation of Australia. I can tell you what the Seven Sisters Songline road trip means for me, but to begin that I need to go back a few years. So it was around about 4 years ago I travelled to the United States with a girlfriend to partake in training other people in a healing modality, and from there we both took a road trip to Sedona, stayed at a First Nations Airbnb. We asked for a blessing from a First Nations people. The lady referred us to a Hopi elder. So we drove across Arizona to the Hopi Mesa to get our blessing, and lo and behold, I got the privilege of being told the sacred story of the Hopi Prophecy Rock. Got to see the rock, had the story told. Also asked, was I able to have permission to take photos of the rock? Ruben said of course, because he also wants to get the story out and the philosophy known. As I took the photo, I then showed that photo to my niece, who said, "Oh my God, look what you've captured." So having a look, I realised I captured the spirit of a elder in the photo right next to Ruben, and it wasn't a shadow figure because it was taken from multiple angles and we had the same spirit being there. So what an acknowledgement to know that I was privileged not only to be there but also honoured to hear the story and to share that amongst the people that I know. Then meeting with Susan, who's doing this documentary. I was on a Zoom and Susan's talking about a philosophy rock, and I'm amongst other people and I'm like, is she talking about the same rock that I'm talking about? No way. So I believe that ancestors chose me to be part of this journey from that moment, because I don't believe that sometimes you choose your journey or your destination. Sometimes it's actually chosen for you. So that was one interesting integration into doing the ancestors work. Then I tipped my toe into learning some ancestral healing, where you go back to heal to your healthiest line, could be 7 or 8 generations back to your father's mother or your father's father, and also your mother's father and mother's mother, and you do a lot of healing back there. Soon as that happened, so much more deeper, I say ancient, ancestor work began. So I've worked across Aboriginal affairs for the last, say, 25-30 years across justice, health, education, mental health, so many different areas, and they're all just as important as each other. And then in 2020 I went through a whole lot of sorry business just at the start of COVID. Now in our culture, sorry business means someone passing. I had 6 family members pass within 6 months, and the last one being my brother, and also on top of that my father was diagnosed with cancer. I then quit my job a couple of months later and I moved back to country, and if I hadn't have done that, I don't know where I would be right now, because the impacts of those sorry business was quite intense, because it's my unspoken role to support everybody through sorry business. I used to work for the Aboriginal funeral service, and I really hold and honour the space of death and the transition of our loved one. So as my son said to me once, I was so upset, and he says, "Mum, I don't know why you're upset. You know this is your business to do this." So he's always keeping me grounded, my middle son. And so going back to country, I made a statement to my sister, who also came and lived with me, say, even though all those years I've worked across Aboriginal affairs, moving back on country, I felt like I had entered kindergarten all over again, and there was a depth to new learning, new connection, and hearing more ancestors' voices. And part of that was also being chosen to be part of the group that's doing the Seven Sisters Songline story. So 2 weeks ago, with a small crew, I left Halls Gap, Victoria, which is called Garryword, or the Western name Garryword, Grampians, and travelled out of Victoria, across New South Wales, up to outback Queensland to Bark Olden, to Susan Thompson's amazing, magnificent outstation homestead, cultural retreat, education centre you would call it, and it had a rock escarpment which has actually got the Seven Sisters story. So then we continued on to travel across Bark Olden, through Mount Isa, Tennant Creek, down to now where we currently are in Uluru. And in the next couple of days I'll be talking with women and doing women's business around the Seven Sisters Songline. So that's how, a very long story, but proper ways in being connected and into the songlines. Why is it important to me with the future of getting the Seven Sisters Songline and even other creation stories? Is I think it's time. Ancestors really are waiting to be heard. Not everybody has been privileged to be able to hear these stories, have these stories embedded, and I want to ensure that my grandchildren know as many creation stories as possible. And I think from those creation stories comes strength, comes resilience, comes hope, comes connection back to country. A lot of people talk about connection to country, but what does that look like? And that's that deep dive of really understanding, and not the kinesthetic surface level stuff, but creation stories that are thousands of years old that connected us to our creation. So I want to start generating conversations amongst the women's groups across Victoria, around not only Seven Sisters songlines, even the Garryword dreaming songlines, any and every songlines. I feel like a sponge. I'm ready to absorb, and then I want the overflow of abundance to go on to my community and the greater community. That's a really big question about, what do I see within healing within my community, and also what the future looks like. That's how long's a piece of string. We even on this road trip, I'm hearing so much conversations around the politics and the struggles, and they are so important. What I'm not hearing is a lot of conversation around how do we do healing within our own family groups, then getting out bigger to our nations groups, and then bigger. There's so many things that have come in to impact vision. Native title, as an example, is one. You have people wanting the treaty, people not wanting treaty, people wanting constitution, people not wanting to be included in the constitution. And I think what comes with that is understanding people's self-determining rights to be individuals as well, or as a collective. And we are one mob, but we have multiple mobs within the mobs. And I think for me, it started with me. I had to do a lot of healing from my own childhood and adulthood and just life, and I'm not going to go into that. And from that, I've understood that I reclaim the power of me if I heal me and I forgive. Forgiveness is probably one of the biggest challenges that we as a mob face. And I'm not talking about forgiveness for Aboriginal people from white Australian, but also within our own mobs. How do we forgive our brothers and sisters? How do we forgive our auntie and uncles? And how do we forgive the other relatives? And most importantly, how do we forgive ourselves? And to do that, people need support as well. and you don't want to be reliant on funding, and I've had this internal struggle myself. I would love to be able to do, I do so many different healing techniques, but for me it's about understanding life as energy, just like our old people did. Our old people were connected to every element: the sky, the sun, the stars, the moon, the plants, the river, the sand. There was no separation. We were expansive. We still are expansive, and it's about, for me, getting back to that healing space. And we need support in having a lot more cultural healing facilities. I think our mob's very heavily over medicated by Western systems, and I'm not a doctor, I'll declare that. Sometimes, that may be needed, but there's our cultural healing. And I think from the cultural healing will come celebration of successes. I don't think we even talk about our successes enough. We are so stuck in the deficit, the challenges, and when are we going to move towards changing that imprint of being in the struggle and moving forward? So I would love to, when I get back home, I would love to be financially able to solely work on healing community.
There's a prophecy that says that the Aboriginal and Indigenous people of the world will be leading this new coming together, when people will be coming to them for the knowledge and for the wisdom and for the teachings. So what is it that you think needs to be moved forward and passed on from your Aboriginal culture?
Acknowledgement, as you see in my t-shirt, always was, always will be. So even acknowledging we have ancient knowledge systems, and coming from Susan Thompson's property, she's starting that. She's got all the medicinal plants, knows the animals, the seasons. That's part of that healing. But it's also like when I work with non-Aboriginal people in the education space, I say to them, this is your art room. Before you went into an art shop, this was our arts and crafts shop. This was our pharmacy. So even acknowledging that knowledge system will be a step in the right direction. And I also say, because I also work with Aboriginal education, and when we're doing Aboriginal resources, I say to the educational space, because sometimes I will say that's a bit expensive, but it's actually not. You're not paying for just a resource, you're paying for the cultural knowledge that goes with that, the cultural protocols that go with that, the cultural protection that goes with that. So you're paying for so much more than you actually realise, and once they realise the richness of who we are, what we have to offer, I think that will help us move forward in everybody accepting our ancient knowledge systems as the way to go, which will bring about that prophecy. So even if you don't know who you are and where you come from, how can you move forward? So that's also about, again, like I said, doing that deeper dive for our own mobs about our dreaming, our songlines, and even driving up here, we've had multiple conversations with mobs all over, Australia, and some are quite enthused and, oh, I know that one. Others like, never heard of it. So there's quite a vast polar opposites in knowing and not knowing. So I think that brings along a sense of belonging. Who doesn't want to belong? And what healing comes from a sense of belonging and love. There's a seeking and a searching for a lot of people that want to belong somewhere. So if you know your stories and where you come from, there is your belonging. It's a deeper connection. And like I spoke earlier about me, I've known I'm Aboriginal all my life. I've only ever been Aboriginal. My mother's non-Aboriginal, but I don't identify as being non-Aboriginal because I've only grown up Aboriginal. My mum was 14 when she married my dad, and her family turned her back on her because she married an Aboriginal man. So I don't know my cousins, my non-Aboriginal cousins. So therefore, That's why I only identify with being Aboriginal, but I also honour my mother, who's not Aboriginal. About a sense of belonging. And I want my grandchildren to know where our people come from. Everywhere you step on in Australia is on Aboriginal land, and there's something special in every part of the land that's just as special and significant and magical and sacred as Uluru is to the mob here. And it's not my mob here. So I don't feel like I'm privileged in that space to be able to talk around Uluru. And you know, just looking at the population today, by the sounds of the accents, most of them were from Australia. And I could guarantee if I went and spoke to a person there who's travelled all this way to see Uluru and the magnificence that it is, and I'm not taking anything away from that, but if I asked them, where do you live, what's the name of your country, and what is culturally sacred there, they would have no idea. Talked so much, Susan, for the last 2 weeks, and we've had some very beautiful, deep conversations, profound conversations. This journey's also been, for me, very personal and not just about the collective, where a lot of my space and time, I think I'm always thinking about the others, my mob, my family. I've really tried to pull that back this last 2 weeks, going into my 3rd week, and it's been very challenging to confront parts of me, where I'm at, what do I want to do, how can I actually be more impactful rather than being across all the spectrums of Aboriginal affairs. You know, I sit on the Aboriginal County Koori Court system as a respected person, the early years specialist rep for the state peak body of education, director of Aboriginal Health and Aboriginal Hands for Hands on Health, which is a not-for-profit we provide allied health treatments, chiropractic treatments to community for free. Do a deadly 2 Gins on the Rocks, which is a trivia, outrageous interactive trivia, and that just grew out of fun, I think, and a bit of mental health practice for myself and my partner Angie, my girlfriend, who does it. And our messaging in the trivia, the music is just a tool, but there's a lot of messaging that goes in that, and we wear on our t-shirts no shame, so we get actually everybody in that space to feel really safe, get up and dance and be interactive. But what we also show them is no matter who's in that room, we can come from lateral love, and that's what we call it. So we work in a space of lateral love. You hear a lot within our communities around lateral violence, so we've done our little hashtag lateral love, and I think sometimes with all the competing challenges with everybody that's working in the Aboriginal affairs space, we forget lateral love because we're so busy fighting systems, each other, getting frustrated. It's easy to throw out lateral violence. You can always even go to catch yourself, oh, what's an opinion and what's lateral violence? You know, there's quite a distinct difference that a lot of people don't talk about. What we don't do enough is spread the lateral love. Many years ago, I remember as a child going down to the mission, and you know, I'd go down on weekends and my dad would just drop me off at my auntie's or my nan's, and for the whole weekend you would have lateral love. You'd be surrounded by lateral love. You'd walk from one house to the other, you'd get fed at this house. I'd have one auntie where I'd go and pick the mushrooms and the blueberries, and another auntie where I'd sit there and do the weaving with. My nan would ensure we were home before Dad got home. That's what lateral love was. It was everybody was everyone's business, and everybody loved and cared for each other. Now it's like we're competing against everything. Even, I think, the colonial system has done it quite smartly in when they've done their funding, they put it in a bucket and watch everyone fight over the same funding, which then creates again more lateral violence. So somehow I would love to see, how do we promote lateral love greater, broader? And we've had conversations this week around love doesn't save everything. It saves a lot. Love is the core answer. The core reason for living is love. love, belonging comes with identity, and you know, we've had conversations all week around how the politics is important, the fight, and I think they can go hand in hand. I think we have people that can do the politics, and then we have people that can do the lateral love and the healing, and it starts with self. That's what I would love to see. More input, more women's voices. The grandmothers are the voice of reason, of love, compassion, the teaching. We're entering that phase of the knowing. We really don't care about people's opinions anymore, and we know we've lived the hard yards, we've done the hard yards, we support everybody, we love everybody, we bring everybody up. And I think more feminine voice needs to be heard, more voices of the grandmothers, and bring along a young person, mentor, guide, shadow, grow together, evolve, challenge one another. I would love to see the past, present and future collaborating together.